I didn't plan to say anything. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I should have shown up that night. But when someone like my boss personally invites you to a company event you were never supposed to be part of, you don't ask questions, you just go. And maybe that's why it hit harder. Because deep down, I think I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't expect to hear it spoken out loud, behind a glass wall, with champagne in his hand and my name in his mouth. The lobby of the new branch looked like something out of a magazine. I walked in trying to keep my shoulders straight, praying no one noticed how uncomfortable I was in a suit I'd worn 3 years ago to a cousin's wedding. People floated through the room in expensive fabrics, shaking hands with practiced smiles. I kept to the edges, pretending to study architectural details just to avoid conversation. The whole place smelled like polished wood, citrus cologne, and money I'd never touch. I shouldn't have been there. That much was obvious from the moment the valet hesitated before taking my keys, like he thought I might be at the wrong address. My name wasn't on the VIP list. I wasn't introduced to anyone important. I stood alone near the decorative waterfall, holding a glass of something that tasted too sweet, trying not to look like an extra in someone else's celebration. My boss, Leonard, was across the room, surrounded by board members and investors. He was in his element, laughing loudly, clapping people on the back, making gestures that filled all the space around him. I told myself I'd congratulate him and leave early. I just needed the right moment. I didn't get one. 10 minutes after I arrived, I was walking down the hallway toward the restroom when I heard it. My name. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even said like I mattered, but it stopped me anyway. I don't know why I paused. Maybe because his tone was so casual, so dismissive, like I wasn't even a real person. No, no, trust me, Leonard was saying. He's harmless, smart enough to stay useful, dumb enough to stay put. Laughter followed. Someone asked something I couldn't hear. Leonard continued, sounding amused. Promotion? God, no. I keep him where he is for a reason. Give him a title, and he might actually start thinking he has options. And I can't have that. He's reliable because he's stuck. My chest tightened. I stayed frozen, listening, even though my brain screamed to walk away. Another voice chimed in. But he's the one who handled the logistics for the Redford deal, right? I thought that was your work. Leonard snorted. Please. I cleaned it up. He does the grunt part, I polish it, and the board thinks I'm a miracle worker. The kid's a convenient shadow. That's all. Convenient shadow. Useful but dumb. Kept in place. The words felt like someone pressing a thumb into a bruise I didn't know was there. They kept talking, their voices low, relaxed, confident. I should have left. I should have walked into the restroom, splashed my face with water, and pretended none of it happened. Instead, I stayed behind the wall, listening as Leonard went on about how he didn't plan to waste budget promoting me because keeping him hungry keeps him quiet. He said it like strategy, like maintenance, like I was a tool. I didn't realize my hand was shaking until the ice in my drink clinked against the glass. I set it down on a side table and stared at my reflection in the polished elevator doors. I looked exactly like the person he described. Tired, small, trying too hard to blend in. A shadow. My jaw locked. I stopped breathing for a second, then forced myself to inhale through my nose. The hallway felt suddenly colder, as if the air conditioning kicked up, just to make the moment more humiliating. A group of guests walked past me, chatting about the new branch's potential, about growth, about innovation. Words that sounded sharp now, words that felt like lies. Because I knew something they didn't. This entire place, this shiny facade, was built on people like me being kept small so someone else could shine. I stepped away from the wall just as Leonard and his circle moved toward the main room again. He didn't see me. He didn't even look in my direction. Why would he? Shadows don't catch the eye. I walked back into the lobby, feeling like I'd left a piece of myself behind in that hallway. Everything looked the same. The lights, the music, the laughter. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something inside me had shifted, subtle but irreversible, like a screw turning 2 millimeters deeper into wood. I wasn't angry yet. That part would come later. What I felt in that moment was something quieter, something heavier. The realization that this wasn't the first time he'd talked about me that way. It was just the first time I'd heard it. I stayed for another 10 minutes, just long enough not to be noticed slipping out. I shook one hand, thanked someone I didn't know, and walked through the glass doors into the night air. It was cold enough to sting when I exhaled. Sitting in my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I just gripped the steering wheel and listened to the muffled echo of Leonard's words bouncing around in the back of my skull. Smart enough to stay useful, dumb enough to stay put. Convenient shadow. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. I didn't know it then, but that night would be the last time I ever let someone decide my worth for me. I thought hearing the truth would break me. Instead, it did something else entirely. It woke me up. I didn't sleep much after the opening. I lay in the dark, replaying every line Leonard said in that hallway, trying to decide if I had somehow misunderstood it. But the more I tried to twist his words into something less cruel, the clearer they became. He meant every syllable. And what I heard that night didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like the truth finally leaking out through a crack he didn't know I was standing behind. The next morning at the office, everything looked normal on the surface. People made jokes by the coffee machine, printers hummed, keyboards clicked like nothing had shifted. I walked in like a man going through the motions of his own life, nodding at people I'd worked with for years, wondering how many of them already knew the things Leonard said about me. By the time I reached my desk, I had convinced myself I was being paranoid, until I opened my inbox. There was an email chain, one I wasn't meant to be CC'd on. It was from a partner I'd worked with on a logistics breakdown 2 months earlier. I remembered spending late nights cleaning up a disaster someone else created, then catching praise for it from the client. At least I thought I did. Leonard had replied to the partner privately, thanking him for the positive feedback and explaining that he, Leonard, had personally stepped in to untangle the mess I supposedly caused. He even apologized on my behalf for my inexperience. I stared at the screen for a long minute. Not shocked, just tired, like my body already knew something my brain was only starting to catch up to. So I scrolled back through older messages, ones I'd ignored at the time. More of the same pattern disguised in polite language. Leonard taking credit, Leonard shifting blame, Leonard using my name as a cushion for his mistakes. The more I read, the more a dull pressure built behind my temples. It wasn't pure anger, it was something narrower, more focused, a feeling that came with teeth. Later that afternoon, I overheard 2 co-workers whispering near the supply closet. They stopped when I walked by, but not fast enough. I caught one line. Leonard says he's not leadership material. The words hit me square in the chest. I kept walking, pretending not to care, but the sentence followed me down the hallway like a stray dog that had decided to stick around. That should have been enough for one day, but it wasn't, because that was just the beginning. I went home early, claiming a headache, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe proof that I was imagining all of it. Instead, I found something much worse. I'd kept copies of my old project drafts on a personal drive, a habit I picked up years ago without thinking. When I compared them to the final presentations Leonard had submitted to the board, something cold slid down my spine, my diagrams, my language. Entire paragraphs lifted word for word. Not once, not twice. 7 projects. And one of them was the reason Leonard got promoted last spring. I sat back in my chair, staring at the wall, while the pieces rearranged themselves into a picture I didn't want to see. It wasn't just that he talked about me like a pawn. He'd been taking pieces off the board behind my back, leaving me with the cleanup so he could take the credit. I opened another folder, emails from clients. In 3 separate chains, he told them I was assisting him, not leading the work. He'd even edited one of my reports before forwarding it, removing my name from the author line. My fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. I wasn't shaking this time. I felt something steadier rising inside me, something patient. I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I just started saving everything. Folders, screenshots, PDFs, backups. I told myself it was for clarity, for closure. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet thought settled like dust on a windowsill. This isn't an accident. This is a pattern. And the pattern wasn't new. 2 years ago, I'd applied for a team lead position, the first step toward real growth. I had the best performance stats in the department. People congratulated me before the decision even came out. But I didn't get the job. The feedback was vague. Not ready. Still needs guidance. Lacks leadership maturity. I'd believed it. Now I wasn't so sure. I dug through my email archives until I found the thread from that time. There it was, my application packet, sent by HR to Leonard for assessment. Attached to it was a short internal note, he wrote. Strong technically, but lacks initiative. Better to reassess next year. Lacks initiative. The man who built his promotions on my work said I lacked initiative. I closed the laptop and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The room felt too small. I stood up, paced once, twice, then stopped at the window. The city lights flickered in the distance. For a moment, I just stared at them, letting the weight of the day settle into something sharper. I didn't know where any of this was going. I didn't have a plan. But I knew one thing with perfect clarity. I wasn't going to let Leonard write the story of my career anymore. I went back to the laptop and opened a new folder, named it simply Truth. As I dragged the first file into it, something shifted again, quieter than anger, steadier than fear. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. And I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost him everything. I didn't plan to start a war. I told myself I was only gathering proof, so I'd stop doubting my own memory. But once you start pulling on a thread that's been woven into your life for years, you don't get to decide what unravels. The truth chooses its own pace, and mine picked up fast. The next week at the office felt strange. Leonard was unusually tense. You could see it in the way he barked at interns, the way he hovered over people's desks, pretending he was checking progress. He kept glancing at me, as if something about me didn't fit the version of the world he'd built in his head. Maybe I wasn't walking with my usual apology in my shoulders. Maybe I'd stopped shrinking around him. Maybe he sensed something shifting. Predators notice when prey stops running. Wednesday morning, he called me into his office. He didn't offer me a seat. I've been reviewing your last few reports, he said, flipping through papers he clearly hadn't read. There are inconsistencies. There weren't. I knew every line by heart. I'd written them carefully, almost clinically, because I wanted to see how he'd try to twist them. What kind of inconsistencies? I asked. His jaw tightened. He wasn't expecting pushback. Just issues with clarity, he said vaguely. I'll handle the client meeting Friday. You stay here and assist. Assist. Like I was a piece of equipment he plugged in when he needed extra power. I nodded slowly, and something in his eyes flickered. Confusion, maybe. Suspicion. The meeting ended without any real point, and as I walked out, I realized something important. He was testing the ground. He just didn't know I'd already started digging under his feet. By noon, I'd gathered enough evidence to map out 2 years of his quiet sabotage, but something was still missing. Proof was good, but corroboration was stronger. So I reached out to someone who never liked Leonard, our senior logistics partner, Evan. We weren't close, but we respected each other. When I emailed him a polite question about a project from last year, he replied in 10 minutes. Call me. When I did, he didn't even say hello. Did you know Leonard told the board he took over the Redford overhaul because you froze under pressure? He asked. The room felt suddenly smaller. No, I said, because that didn't happen. I know, Evan replied. I was there. You saved that account. Without your adjustments, we would have lost half the shipment. My throat tightened. He kept speaking. He used your work to negotiate his promotion. Everyone thought you were just his assistant. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone harder than necessary. Hearing it said out loud by someone who had no reason to lie, there was satisfaction in it, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Before we hung up, Evan hesitated. If you ever need someone to confirm details to HR or the board, you know where to find me. I thanked him, trying to keep my voice steady. After the call, I sat in silence, letting the words settle into place. The picture was getting clearer and uglier. That evening, I stayed in the office late. Leonard had already left, his lights off, his door shut. I stood there, staring at the frosted glass for a long moment. Behind that door, he'd built a career on my back. Behind that door, he'd told jokes about me to people who signed paychecks. Behind that door, he'd cut my name out of presentations I wrote. I walked past it without touching the handle. I didn't need confrontation. I needed precision. Back at my desk, I drafted a timeline. Dozens of moments I'd ignored, excused, or forgotten suddenly made sense. The missing emails, the mistaken meeting invites, the comments he made about me needing more seasoning, even after I carried projects that boosted our quarterly revenue. By the time I finished, I had a clear, devastating picture, but I still didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to wait, to think it through, to give myself time. But time is funny when you've been underestimated long enough. It's like pressure building in a pipe. You don't feel the crack until the water is already spraying. The break happened on Friday. Leonard came into the office that morning with his usual overly confident walk, holding a stack of printed reports I knew I'd prepared. He stopped at my desk and tapped them twice with his finger. "You won't be needed at the meeting," he said. "I'll present these." "I know," I replied. He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "That you'll present them," I said simply. "You usually do." His eyes narrowed. He opened his mouth, then shut it. For once, he didn't have a clever line ready. He walked away without saying anything else. That was the moment. The instant I knew I had him. Because men like Leonard don't get nervous unless they feel something slipping. I waited until he left for the client meeting. Then I stood up, walked to the investor relations office, and asked the assistant if the regional board member, Mr. Clark, was available for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That was all I needed. He wasn't a warm man, but he respected competency. I'd worked indirectly with him before. When I stepped into his office, he gestured to a chair. "What's wrong?" he asked bluntly. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't blame anyone. I simply opened my folder and placed 2 documents in front of him. My original project draft for Redford, and the final submission Leonard had claimed as his. His eyes moved between them, line by line, paragraph by paragraph. When he looked up, something in his expression had changed. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I wrote it," I said quietly. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he pushed his glasses up his nose and said, "Show me everything." So I did. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't the heavy kind. It was the kind that meant gears were turning in someone's mind. Serious gears? Clark wasn't emotional, but he wasn't stupid. When he finished reviewing the files, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "This can't leave this room yet," he said, "but it also can't be ignored." He didn't promise anything. He didn't need to. The fact that he said it couldn't be ignored was enough. I stood, thanked him, and left the office. As I stepped into the hallway, I expected to feel terrified. I expected regret. I expected panic. Instead, I felt something unexpected. A small, quiet moment of relief. Not victory. Not yet. But the first breath of someone finally coming up for air. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I expected fallout within days. I expected whispers, meetings behind closed doors, sudden changes in schedules. But real corporate consequences move silently at first, like a storm forming far out at sea. You don't notice the danger until the air starts to feel different. The air changed the following Tuesday. Leonard walked into the office with the swagger of a man who thought everything was under control, but I noticed his smile was tighter. People didn't greet him the same way. Conversations paused when he approached. A few managers avoided eye contact altogether. Something had shifted, and he felt it even if he couldn't name it yet. By noon, Clark and two HR directors called him into a conference room. I watched the door close behind them. Leonard shot me a look. Not angry, not suspicious, but confused. Like he was trying to read a language he'd forgotten he once knew. I didn't look away. For the first time in years, I didn't look away from him. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. When Leonard came out, he looked like someone had drained the color from him. His tie was crooked. His hand shook slightly when he tried to adjust it. He didn't speak to anyone. He just walked back to his office, closed the door, and stayed there until he left early. Something he never did. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. It didn't feel real. The next day, a company-wide email went out announcing a routine internal performance audit of upper management. Neutral wording, harmless on the surface. But people in corporate know what that phrase means. It's the sound of someone falling without anyone saying the word fall. Within a week, they suspended Leonard pending review. They didn't say why. They didn't need to. Half the people in the building had theories. The other half pretended not to. I kept my head down and continued my work like always. Except this time, no one treated me like a background character. During the investigation, a few of our long-term clients confirmed exactly what Clark needed to hear. They had been sending positive messages about my work for years, messages that never reached the board because Leonard intercepted them. One client even forwarded a chain where Leonard had rewritten my updates to sound incompetent before CCing the board. Piece by piece, the truth built itself. The audit wrapped up 3 weeks later. The announcement came on a Thursday morning. Leonard's contract terminated due to ethical and performance-related violations. No thank you, no farewell gathering, no speech, just a line in an email that made the office strangely quiet for hours. I didn't celebrate. I didn't want to. The win didn't come with fireworks. It came with clarity. The next day, Clark called me into his office. He greeted me differently this time, not as an employee, but as someone whose contribution he finally saw. He gestured for me to sit and folded his hands in front of him. "You've carried more responsibility than your position reflects," he said, "and more than we realized." I stayed silent, waiting. "We need strong leadership in the new branch," he continued. "Someone who understands the operations, the clients, the projects. Someone who won't repeat the mistakes we just corrected." He let the word mistakes hang in the air. Then he told me the board wanted me to take over operational management of the new branch, effective immediately. Not interim, not acting manager. Mine. For a moment, I didn't speak, not because I was overwhelmed, but because something inside me settled into place in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, a quiet kind of rightness. I accepted. There was no victory lap, no dramatic walk through the office. I simply packed my things, moved them to the new branch, and sat at a desk that used to belong to someone who thought I'd never rise higher than him. In the days that followed, I rebuilt the workflow the way it should have been all along. Transparent, fair, sane. I brought in people who had been overlooked. I credited the right work to the right names. I spoke to clients directly, not through filters. Every step felt steady, grounded. And then something small happened that I didn't expect. A junior analyst, someone Leonard barely knew existed, stopped me in the hallway. She hesitated, then said, "Thank you for the way you run things now. People notice." It wasn't praise. It was something better. Recognition without performance. That evening, after everyone left, I walked the empty floors of the new branch, the same place where, weeks earlier, I'd stood as a guest who didn't belong. Now I walked those halls with keys in my pocket and a calm I couldn't fake. I stopped at the glass wall overlooking the city, the same kind of wall I once hid behind, listening to words meant to make me small. I put my hand on the cool surface and exhaled. It was quiet up there, not the hollow kind of quiet, but the peaceful kind that comes after a storm has passed and the world finally stops shaking. People think justice feels loud, dramatic, explosive. But the real thing? It's quiet. It's steady. It feels like coming home to a version of yourself you thought you'd lost. I didn't get revenge. I got something better. I got my life back. И последняя строка по лимиту. I stood there for a long moment, letting that truth settle into me fully.